Hello and welcome along to Red Tinted Glasses. This is the live pre-match thoughts ahead of the Dons opening game of the season as the Dons face Hearts at Tynecastle. It's breezy, it's blustery, and there's a lot to get through before kick-off tonight. I'm modelling the European kit, which was released since we last recorded, an absolutely cracking kit, which I'm sure we'll see in action at Tynecastle tonight as well. Just a shame that the club sold out so quickly of those t-shirts. Some departures as well from the club since we've last spoke. Alfie Babbage, as we've spoken about on this podcast for a while, has finally sealed that loan move back to Inverness Cali Thistle, and Pape Gay confirming his departure to Turkey as well. Sadly, no incomings either on the podcast tonight with me or to the Don strike force. Hopefully some additions to that later on in the week. I will be back at full time with some thoughts on the game as well, and we'll also have a second episode out this week, third here on the YouTube channel. Colin Watt from A Celtic State of Mind will be joining me tomorrow night to go through a preview of the Celtic game. That will be a pre-record episode, and that episode will come out on Wednesday on all platforms here. Before we get into tonight's game as well, I think it's only right that since I'm wearing the European kit, we also discuss the European draw, as the Dons today found out their opponents for the Europa League Playoff. The Dons have been drawn to play at home first against FSCB, formerly known as Steaua Bucharest for those of a certain vintage, and Kosovan champions Drita. Now, both teams go into the third round of the Europa League, having lost to former opponents of the Dons in European action. Steaua Bucharest, they fell to Scandija in the last round of Champions League qualifying. Maybe a bit of a surprise, losing both legs in that one. In fact, actually, FSCB haven't had the best start to their season in Europe or domestically. Those that will maybe follow certain pages on social media will have seen that former Kilmarnock man Danny Armstrong, in fact, scored a hat-trick for their rivals, Dinamo Bucharest, this weekend in a 4-3 victory. So FCSB have only started the season with one league win, one draw and two defeats, and as I said, a kind of faltering start to their domestic campaign. But I suppose from a fan's point of view, Bucharest, a lovely city to go and visit, cheap city as well, and those looking for tickets as well, I'm sure will be hoping to see FSCB go through, because of course they play in Bucharest's 50,000 seater stadium, so I'm sure demand for tickets can be easily met if we face the Romanians. And good to see a few of you joining in. I will get to some of the comments that have come in on the game tonight as well. David McLennan saying he's feeling bright and breezy about tonight. I know that's a great pun. It fully intended about the weather conditions, David. Do appreciate that. Maybe one of a few feeling confident for tonight. In terms of the European draw, can't be bothered saying it's a very winnable draw if we can get some firepower in the door. I do also think the fact we're at home first plays into our hands, means that we'll be going away knowing what we need to do. And I think we've all seen what Pittodrie can be like on European nights. Full house, create some form of intimidating atmosphere, and hopefully, as I said, give us a lead to either Bucharest or going over to Kosovo. As I said, the other opponents we could face is Drita. As I also said, lost to former opponents of the Dons. They lost 3-0 to Copenhagen in qualifying to find themselves into this round. Their league season hasn't yet started, but they are 4 times and current Kosovan league champions. They won't be playing at their normal home ground, though. They will be playing in the capital city of Pristina at the Kosovan National Stadium as well. I think Ryan Krill's article today in the Press and Journal said it would be about 2,000 tickets for away fans. So maybe slightly more difficult, certainly more difficult to get to, more expensive in terms of travel, cheap accommodation, I'm sure cheap alcohol for those that like to dabble in a pint or two when they're abroad watching the Dons. But again, another unique certainly first time they'll have faced Kosovan opposition, but a unique trip. I remember going over to Bosnia for Soroki Brijeg, and these kind of weird and wonderful trips are the ones that stand out the most. So for those planning to go to either Bucharest or Kosovo, I'm sure will enjoy the trip and make the most of it. Hopefully, I don't know about anybody in the comments. I feel a bit more confident of Europa League progression after that draw. But I do kind of agree with that comment that we had on screen earlier there from Can't Be Bothered. Still feel we possibly need a little bit more firepower. Maybe some confidence will flow through us, depending what we see tonight from the Dons. Of course, we've got the Celtic game coming up and then a trip to Morton before we get to that Europa League tie as well. So let's focus then on the game tonight. As I said, Dons heading to Tynecastle. There was a bit of doubt whether the game would be on. Very windy conditions here in Aberdeen tonight, but the game goes ahead. And Jimmy Tillene has announced his first starting lineup for the league campaign, which sees Dimitar Mitov start in goal, Alexander Jensen, Jack Milne, Matt Knoesters and Graham Shinney. I'm going to say we're going to go with a back four, judging by that. I think the biggest surprise is Sivert Hilton Nielsen returning into midfield in place of Ante Palaversa. He joins Leighton Clarkson in the centre of midfield. I know myself and Phil spoke on the last episode about that tenacity in midfield. I have to say, given we've seen Ante Palaversa line up with Leighton Clarkson right throughout pre-season, I am surprised going into that first competitive game that Nielsen switches in, but there's, I'm sure, a method in the madness of that, and excitement on the wings as Topi Keskinen and Nicholas Milanovic makes his Premiership debut. I think it's going to be really key to keep the ball on the ground, and in those two players, we've got players that can be direct, can look to cause the Hearts team problems. And Adil Oshish looks set to play in behind Kusini Yengi. Those two players also making their Premiership debuts for the Dons as well. Again, I'm sure Adil is a player that many of us are excited by what he brings to the Dons starting 11 in terms of his creativity. Again, those that will have followed the channel for a while will have listened to Gary's thoughts from the Roker Report when he joined me on the back of Adil signing. Yes, Hearts are probably a very physical opposition that we'll come up against, but I'm sure if there's a pocket of space or a ball that he can find, he'll be the player that we'll really look to lean on in that. And I'm sure Kusini Yengi is going to be trying his best to feed off that service, or as we've seen at times in pre-season, be that link-up man to feed, whether it's Adil, Nicholas Milanovic or Topi Keskinen to create chances. And I'm really intrigued to see tonight if we do start seeing the kind of marks of a Jimmy Tillene team where there's maybe more of a reliance on the wingers rather than the strikers as well. Kaiser, I know you're saying that we're a bit light in that midfield. I know there's a concern around that. I think maybe even a little bit light on the wings in terms of that physicality, but I'm hoping that direct pace that those two brings will cause that Hearts defence problems. I also share the concern about Nielsen not playing for a few months. Not sure if I'll agree that he's not necessarily fit. He's got minutes in the bank over the course of the pre-season campaign. Correct, not as much as Palaversa. There will certainly be questions, I'm sure, if that midfield battle isn't won, why Palaversa or Dante Polvara, as you've mentioned, haven't started. But that is the decisions that Jimmy Tillene gets paid for. And as Risey points out, Jimmy trusts Nielsen. There's a reason that he's in there over Palaversa or Polvara as well. Maybe he wants that little bit of bite that we know Nielsen can provide in the centre of the park, and potentially in comparison to Palaversa, that bite and sitting ability that Nielsen has allows Leighton Clarkson to be freed up a little bit more. I don't think the conditions necessarily allow Leighton Clarkson to be freed up and spray the ball around as much as he could. but he could potentially go up and push up a little bit further in support of the front 3-4. So that'll be interesting, and I'm really interested to see Nicholas Milanovic tonight. I know Notorious here hoping that he's going to tear the Hearts defence apart. I'm sure a lot of us agree and hope for that as well. Looking at the home side, they line up with Clark in goals. Maybe a surprise on that. I know they've had a lot of choice in the goalkeeping department. I would certainly like to see us testing Xander Clark early on. A very defensive-looking Hearts, I feel. No real surprise when it comes to Derek McInnes. Harry Milne in defence alongside Georgie Kent, Craig Halkett, Stuart Finlay. That midfield looks very bogged down with Cammy Devlin, I'm sure, on for a booking. Him and Nielsen, I'm sure, will be two search for that. McEntee, as Greg mentioned on the last podcast, one to watch for the Hearts team. He's in there alongside someone with an extremely long name, and Blair Spittle. And then you've got Claudio Braga and Lawrence Shanklin leading the line for the Jammed Hearts. And I'm sure Hearts fans will be hoping that they will cause our back line a little bit of problems. I'm wondering if there's anybody as well, a little bit surprised maybe to see that partnership with Jack Milne and Mats Knusters continue. Obviously, Alfie Dorrington coming in the summer and doing the pre-match press conference with Jimmy Tulane, but Jimmy's opted to stick with that Scottish Cup winning centre-back pairing of Jack Milne and Knusters. And I think with Nicky Devlin on the bench, it allows a change there at left back if things aren't going. I know a few of you in the comments pointing out to the fact that with the squad numbers being announced this week, number 3 still being vacant, Max Lowe, as John Kilo points out, is available on a free. Could he be a player that the Dons are looking at? Again, could wages be a stumbling block around that? Again, if we look at the squad numbers that have been announced this week, I think there's some intriguing takes you could take from that, in the fact that Fletcher Boyd's been named 17. A lot of people have pointed to the fact that maybe indicates more game time for him. I think he'll be one to watch off the bench tonight. And 14, 15 and 16 still available. I just wonder how many of us thought when the Dons tweeted that out, the squad numbers was actually going to include Lazetic as a new signing as well, but not to be. Paul Donaldson, you're asking, is Christers Tobers injured? Yes, in that press conference from Jimmy Tulane, he confirmed that both Tobers and Gyamfi are out until the end of August, which for me is disappointing, for the latter, of course, being signed in the summer as that Jack McKenzie replacement, I guess, if you want to call him that, coming in, getting injured over on that pre-season tour in Portugal. But the disappointment for me around Tobers and Gyamfi being injured is that they've now effectively missed a lot of pre-season, so getting both up to speed will be difficult. And again, I think, for those that maybe doubted the reason why the Dons went and got Alfie Dorrington back, that injury to Christers Tobers is a reason why, because we can't afford to be thin on the ground. Steve Williamson, good to have you with us, Steve. He says, great to see Milne starting tonight. Let's get off to a winning start tonight. For me, in the couple of preseason games, I thought Jack's looked a little bit nervy. Hopefully he's got those nerves out the way and continues where he left off in terms of domestic action. I guess, as Kaiser also points out, you point out being unsure about Gavin Malloy. I think the interesting one, I mentioned Nicky Devlin as being an option off the bench. Gavin Malloy also poses that option off the bench in the left back area. I do think we will turn to Nicky Devlin first, because he has that versatility at both left and right wing back, so allows us to move Jensen if we needed to. But yeah, interesting to see what comes from that. And I do think it's kind of interesting, given the weather conditions, that we've still gone with a fairly attacking team. Both teams, certainly from an Aberdeen point of view, looks to be attacking. Not convinced that Hearts team is overly attacking. I think it's classic Derek McInnes, not set up to lose the game. I think a point for both sides would be extremely welcomed. more so Aberdeen, given that we know what the away team fares in this fixture. I think from an Aberdeen point of view, it's vitally important to get points on the board early, as I said on the last episode, before we really get into that European fixtures and start playing the Thursday, Sunday games. And kind of based on some of the action last week, get a bit of confidence into the players ahead of next weekend's game, because Celtic huffed and puffed for large periods of the game. So if we can get some points on the board, 1 or 3, we're going to Pittodrie with a little bit of momentum. And why not go and get another result against them? I suppose, again, looking at the team news, looking towards the bench, again, another big talking point around the bench, it is going to be the fact that Esther Sockler is missing from the bench. Peter Ambrose once again taking striking duties. Esther Sockler is on the bench over Peter Ambrose. So good to see Esther there, having not seen too much of him in the pre-season action. And again, with Kjartansson there in midfield, could he be an option to come into that midfield over Palaversa? I think that's going to be the real interesting kind of second half, what Jimmy Talleen does with his substitutes. And I do think we'll see both Shaden Morris and Fletcher Boyd introduced to give us a bit of injection on the wings, as we know Jimmy Talleen tends to favour. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't turn to Esther Sockler and make that change up front. Again, as we've seen Mukuseni Yangi so far in pre-season, not lasting 90 minutes. Could tonight be the opportunity for him to make a mark with those 90 minutes? Again, looking at the bench, it definitely does feel light in terms of striking options. I think we're just about there on the wing and in midfield. Again, you could argue 1 or 2 short to really feel that we've got the right depth and strength there. But let's see what comes from tonight as well. Again, interesting, Paul, that you mentioned here in the comments. First 2 games really difficult. Don't like to say it, but I think 2 points from these matches would be a half decent start. Again, having that debate in one of the group chats I'm in, I find it hard to disagree. I do think, given, again, our record at Tynecastle in 2017, as Phil mentioned on the last episode, the last time that we won at Tynecastle, a point would be a good point tonight. I think when you look at home games, you've always got to have the mindset to be winning those home games. So yes, I could see those that are shouting at their TV screens or phones right now, listening to me ramble on, that no, if we get a point tonight, we should absolutely have the mindset that we, by the end of the weekend, come away with 4 points. But, I do think 2 points would be a solid platform to build on to going into then what would be a home game against Falkirk, because of course that Dundee United game has since been postponed due to our Europa League playoff. And obviously potentially Dundee United going another round if they can see past Rapid Vienna. So I think interesting to see how we build this team up over the course of the next couple of games. And obviously, as we've discussed, Jimmy Talleen favouring his favourite in Nielsen in the middle of the park. I think, is there pressure on Kusini Yengi going in tonight? Possibly. I'm sure as a striker desperate to score and make his mark for those that have braved the conditions, I'm sure as many in the media will tell us, for those that have headed down to Tynecastle tonight from up here in the northeast. I know a lot of you that join in these live streams are from the Central Belt as well, and have said that it's still pretty windy as well. Hugh Burns, you're mentioning Yengi as well. We'll be watching very closely tonight as your eyes may be deceived against Ipswich. Again, as we touched on the last episode, difficult to judge a lot of players given the quality we were up against in Ipswich. I mean, the quality against Cove, I don't think he necessarily set the heather on fire either. But this is where most of the new signings are really going to be judged when it matters most, when there's points on the line. Let's see what they can deliver tonight. I do think, though, I'll caveat that and say that Yengi will need to rely heavily on some decent service. So again, let's see what both Topi and Nicholas Milanovic can provide for him in a way of good service. I also think, though, for Yengi, he does need to be able to hold the ball up better than we've seen so far if he wants to then bring the likes of Oshish and both wingers into the game as well. So a lot to be asked. I think he also does give us a little bit of a physical presence because from what I've seen, other than Knoesters and Jack Milne, it's not an overly tall team. Yes, Milanovic is tall, but for me, lacking in real physicality. Watch him go and score a header now. It is quite a small team, and we know that Hearts, again, apart from Cammy Devlin, are blessed with a lot of height and a lot of physicality in that team as well. So again, I know Phil's in attendance tonight, and I know Phil's been enjoying doing his own Q&A over on our Instagram page at rtg.podcast. If you haven't been following Phil's Ask Him Anything, he'll be in attendance at Tynecastle tonight. And his pet peeve, of course, on this podcast is zonal marking. So is that something Derek McInnes might look to take advantage of course, Jimmy Tilleen carries that on into this season? I'm sure many of us will be hoping he doesn't carry that into certainly this game, if not the majority of this season as well. So lots to get, to get into, to get involved. And Sam, that is absolutely the reason that I've come live tonight, to try and give my thoughts on the game, because of course Sky Sports, I'm sure, despite having an hour build up to the game, will primarily be focused on two teams not actually playing in said game. But of course that's how they perceive to promote Scottish football to the best of its ability. Callum was hoping to join me tonight, but was running late at work, but thankfully did get around to doing the thumbnails. And of course, as I've said, Phil's in attendance. So really does appreciate a lot of you joining tonight here, also putting your thoughts into the comments sections. If you do have any thoughts on tonight's team news, even tonight's European draw that we found out at lunchtime, questions you've got for going into the week ahead, or a transfer market, fire them into the comments. I'll stay live for another 5-10 minutes and we can get them discussed and looked at as well. I think, again, when we look at the Dons team for tonight, as I said there in kind of relation to Hugh Burns' comment about Kusini Yengi, this is really the place where all our new signings are going to be judged. I'm not saying I'm not convinced by any of them yet. I just don't think any of them have made a real mark on the team as yet in pre-season. Again, probably an ode to the fact that Jimmy Tilleen has stepped up the quality of opposition we've played in pre-season. I'm sure, as we've seen in previous, when we've come up against Highland League opposition, some of these players would have really kind of stood out and bred confidence in not only themselves, but the fans. And you could argue it's a clever move by Jimmy Tilleen, playing those more experienced teams, higher quality, because it is a real test of our ability, of his ability as well, in how he manages these games and how he gets the best out of the players as well. But again, going back to the point that we've made on this podcast plenty of times before, Jimmy Tilleen can do all he can in terms of getting his point, his game plan across. As soon as those players cross the white line, it is up to them to carry out said game plan. He can't control if we can't pass the ball 5 yards to a player in white, as I'm sure will be, as I said, proudly wearing that new European kit tonight at the game, due to that North Sea kit and red kit clashing, given especially the red kit now that we've got maroon going through it. And I do agree, Dave McLennan, that it is encouraging to see most of the new signings starting. Again, going back to what we saw in terms of the lineup against Ipswich, as Phil suspected, it was going to be similar to what we saw tonight against Hearts. Sadly, not like for like, given the change of Ante Palaversa for Nielsen. It'll be interesting to see if Jimmy Tilleen delves into why he made that change. Is it an injury? Is it purely tactical? Or, as a couple of you have said as well, is it down to Jimmy sticking with his favourites. If it's sticking with his favourites, we've all seen how that works in the past. It quickly gets cottoned on to. Fans don't miss those sort of tricks as well. Hopefully, though, there is plenty of positivity to come from tonight. And those in attendance also get back up the road safely after the game. As I've said, I will be live at full time, reacting whatever the outcome of the game is, and giving my thoughts on that. I contemplated doing a quick 10 minutes at halftime as well, but I'll spare you having to listen to my drivel for the 10-minute halftime, 15-minute halftime interval, and I'll jump back on at full time. So those of you that do subscribe to the channel, have your notifications on, will get an immediate notification of when we're live. And a big shout out to those of you that have recently subscribed to the channel, of course, on the back of the 4-4-2 piece that I did previewing the season. Again, joys of doing that in June when you say some of the young players, but I'm hoping Toby Keskinen can live up to that billing that I've said of being the one to watch over the 90 minutes tonight. So yes, continued thanks to those of you that support the channel, have supported us by buying the Scottish Cup t-shirt that's still sitting there behind me. The link is in the description. Of course, we are playing Celtic this weekend. I know a couple of you ordered that t-shirt over the weekend, so that it was here for next weekend. So get on that tonight to ensure you can get that t-shirt by the weekend if you want to proudly rub it in the face of any Celtic fans you know, or for those of you in Section S or the lower deck, can show it off to the visiting support at the weekend as well. I'll be on the Cynic podcast this week, and that'll be getting proudly displayed there. And I'm sure Colin's going to absolutely love to see it when he comes on the podcast tomorrow night to preview the Celtic game as well. So as I said, lots of content coming out on this channel this week. Lots of content coming out in August as well. We've got a Morton fan coming on in preparation for the League Cup game. And of course, we'll be back to 2 shows a week when we get into European playoff contention as well. So thank you for joining me for the first half hour. Let's hope the game goes well tonight, and I will see you all at full time. So until then, come on, you Reds!